Coming to you from Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, it's time for the Gardening Simplified radio, podcast, and YouTube show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Today we talk about supporting roles, plants that play supporting roles. They were an essential element in theater long before movies came along, and then when movies came along, they invented an award for supporting roles, and we could argue that they are very important in movies and, of course, very important also in our landscapes. A supporting role performs a role in a play or a film below that of a leading anchor and above that of a bit part. So think of Batman and Robin. Robin would be the supporting role. Think about one of my favorite movies, Apollo 13. Ed Harris. He has been a great supporting role actor through the years. He played the role of Gene Kranz. Tom Hanks, of course, had the lead role in that movie, or Jonah Hill in Moneyball with Brad Pitt taking the lead role. And then you have actors and actresses like Meryl Streep or Jack Nicholson who can do both. Play a great leading role or play a great supporting actor. And I'd have to say right off the bat, Stacy, that I personally believe, well, the front runner for supporting role in a landscape has got to be evergreens. Evergreens, the foundation, the structure, the bones of a landscape. I think they're the perfect example. Do you agree?
I don't disagree, but that would not have been my first choice.
There you go.
I don't think you're wrong at all. I'm not like, how dare you? But no, I actually feel, in my opinion, that evergreens kind of have more of a starring role because they have year-round interest.
Yep.
And they typically have such a distinctive shape. You know, so to me, a supporting role plant is one that just kind of does its thing. It lets the stars be the stars. It doesn't interfere with their shape. It doesn't clash with their colors. It doesn't pull focus, as it were. But so it lets them be themselves, and it doesn't fade into the background, but it doesn't compete either. And I would say, typically, maybe it's just me, my eye very often goes straight to the evergreens, unless there's something else in flower. Like, you know, if you've got a landscape with hydrangeas and evergreens and the panicle hydrangeas are in full bloom, well, then that would definitely be the star at that particular moment. But I think when I was thinking about this, I think about supporting plants. And have you ever been to the Lurie Garden in Chicago?
Have not.
Okay. Oh, wow. Such an amazing public garden. Just beautiful, designed by consummate plantsman Pete Udolph. And when you go there, I think you really get a great sense of what is a supporting role plant. And he uses a native Euphorbia corollata, as a supporting plant. It's in bloom in late summer and fall, and it has these kind of blue-green leaves and these fluffy clouds of white flowers, and it kind of repeats all through the garden. And that, to me, is the supporting role plant. It doesn't take away from anything else. It has presence. It lets everything do its own thing, but it just kind of knits everything together.
See, I'm liking this. This is a good debate because I think evergreens, you know, you think of junipers or boxwood, they play a filler supporting role, and yet some evergreens, like let's talk about gin fizz juniper or sting arborvitae, they could play a lead role. The eye is drawn towards those plants. Foliage or filler plants, I think, often play a supporting role, a backdrop, and yet even at that, in the shade, you could take Sun King Aurelia, you can take heart-to-heart caladiums, Rex begonias, coleus. You could argue that they play a starring role also. So this is a good debate.
Well, it really depends on how you're using it. It really depends on your landscape. And while you were, mentioning those, and we're kind of, people are familiar with the concept of the thriller, filler, spiller as a container design thing. So the plants that we're talking about as a supporting role are the filler, which doesn't mean they just sit around and take up space. Not at all. They still have an important role to fulfill here. But I was thinking about lantana. And lantana is a plant that can be a thriller, filler, or spiller, all depending on how you get it.
True.
You know, you can get a tree form lantana that is absolutely a thriller. You can get, a hanging basket when it would be a spiller, but very often it's used as a filler. So sometimes these are there's a lot of leeway here as to say what's what.
So the theory here is, I'll go back to it, Meryl Streep or Jack Nicholson, both fabulous in either a leading role or a supporting role. Again, when I think about supporting role plants, I think ornamental grasses make a great supporting role plant. They're dynamic. Ground covers play a supporting role. They fill in. I think of the summer fill-ins when you hit June and July and August and it's hot, and you can get those bargain annuals that grow really fast at the garden center, and they fill in. They play a supporting role. As a matter of fact, in summer, fun plant to grow, cassia or popcorn plant. Have you grown that in your landscape?
I have not grown it in my own landscape because it gets a little big for my space. But I do love it. I've seen it, and whenever I do see it, I always make people smell it because it does smell just like buttered popcorn.
Hot buttered popcorn at the theater. They grow it in the children's garden here at the Frederick Meyer Gardens. And so that could be a supporting role plant. Native plants, of course, they don't have to earn top billing, but every garden needs a supporting cast. I think of Arctic Fire, red twig dogwood as a great example in my mind. But even, look at flowering annuals. Superbena verbena. I love that plant, like pink cashmere. And it could stand on its own as a fabulous flowering annual, and yet you put it in combination baskets in a container or a hanging basket. That plant plays an incredible, Biden's is another one, a great supporting role in a beautiful basket.
I think that for me, that characteristic of having almost like a hazy type effect is sort of where my brain goes when it comes to flowering supporting plants. And the supporting plants don't always need to flower, like you were saying about like a ground cover juniper.
Yeah, or they don't necessarily have to be center stage. When you look at perennials, like you look at silver lining artemisia or a workhorse like daylilies, they can be very beautiful. The blooms just last a day, as the name notes. However, they're a workhorse in the landscape, and I think daylilies really play a supporting role in the landscape. Iris and peonies, their time in the spotlight is short, but after that, they still play some aspect of a supporting role.
Yeah, definitely the iris. Now, because, a peony foliage, it's just kind of there. But iris foliage is very much a strong structural element that you're grateful to have well beyond the time that the flowers have bloomed.
Absolutely. So the supporting role plants play an important role. Let me give you a limerick that popped into my head to talk about supporting role plants. No drama, no diva, no worrywart. They know their role to lend support. Oh, hydrangeas, they get all the press. To begonias, I acquiesce. I'm just trying to be a good sport. I'm content to support and console. According to a public opinion poll, roses win the popularity contest, and Jasmine, you've always impressed. I guess you're just on a roll. And that's what happens, Stacy, is that plants get on a roll, and pretty soon you see everyone in the neighborhood planting the same thing and not necessarily thinking about the important role that supporting role plants play.
It's so true. And honestly, that was one of the reasons why I was very interested in getting into gardening, because my mom was living in a newer subdivision, and that's what happened. One person calls a landscaper. They say, hey, they did a good job. Everyone starts calling that landscaper. Everyone gets a cookie cutter landscape.
Yeah.
Because people are a little bit afraid to go out there and choose plants. They're a little bit afraid to stick their neck out. So it does end up becoming like kind of, predictable, because it becomes a little bit of an epidemic. So it's good to think outside the box and to also understand, like we've already said, that these are not hard and fast rules. How you use something, where you plant something, will largely determine whether it is playing a supporting role or not. But I think for myself, again, the importance is some sort of like light, ethereal texture in the garden. So it's not like a big blob that's just taking all your attention. And ideally some soft color that kind of just blends along with everything.
So I happen to have the answer. Here's the winner of the best. I have the envelope, please. I'm going to let you open that up, Stacy. Okay. And let me say that the supporting role plant in a landscape does not detract from the leading actor, but rather, there you go. There's our winner, wood trellis, for best supporting role.
Oh, I get it now.
Thank you very much.
I should have seen it coming.
Stacy's coming up next with Gardening Simplified's Plants on Trial. That's next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where we are talking about plants in supporting roles. And that can mean a lot of different things, as we have already determined. But Rick, you haven't told me what plants play supporting roles in your garden.
Well, I knew wood trellis would be controversial, but somebody has to win. And I still think that my favorite supporting role plants, whether it's in a container or in my landscape, are ornamental grasses.
Okay.
Whether annual or perennial, that's my
Any particular one?
Oh, I love Miscanthus Morning Light. I love the Proven Winners annual grass called Vertigo. I love that plant. Proven Winners plant Skyrocket. They're all great, but I think they play just this fabulous. You know, they don't detract from the star, the leading actors that maybe are hydrangeas or some other blooming plant. But boy, they do a great job of supporting
that rotating cast of whoever is the star at the particular moment. So I was thinking about what is a supporting plant in my garden, and there's two plants that came to mind for me that I feel like play a supporting role. Number one is meadow rue, thalictrum. Oh. So I have a very nice self-sowing population of that. So it's tall. It's very thin, and it has that, again, that I just can't get rid of this like hazy, like cloudy texture that to me makes it a supporting role plant. So it's tall, it gets these really dreamy little flowers, very delicate foliage. And what I love about it is that it just pops up wherever it will go. If I don't want it somewhere, I just pull it out. So it kind of has that effect of tying everything together. So that's in the very small shady part of my garden. In the sunny part, I love, and it has not really fully taken off for me yet, but I'm hoping that it will, flax. Oh. So I don't know if you're familiar, if you've ever grown it before, but it has the most beautiful, amazing blue flowers. And that blue, so it has like kind of a silvery blue foliage, very fine, very easy to, easy to blend with everything. And then that blue, it's just the particular shade of blue that it is. It goes with everything.
I like that. So you're choosing color to be that supporting role, like the blue in flax, whereas with myself, ornamental grasses, I choose them because they're good dancers. They dance in the landscape. They provide movement, which I think really provides that supporting cast.
Yeah, I think air and space is absolutely a non-negotiable on here. What that looks like to you is really something to determine. And I think another important part of having a supporting role plant is repeating it through the garden.
Yes.
It's not a supporting role plant is not just like, I put one here and now it's supporting the rest of the garden. The supporting role plant is almost like a theme. Like you can think about it like if you listen to classical music in a symphony, there's theme and variation. So it's sort of a theme that unites everything in your garden throughout. It can be front to back. It can be within a single bed. It's an element that's repeated.
I agree. Throughout. They just don't show up in the credits at the end. Like the key grip. Always feel sorry for that person.
Oh, they're in the credits. You just have to stay till like the very bitter end to see who that person. They should get more
credit for what they do.
Yes, they definitely should. They work hard. So, as far as plants on trial go, I think very often, and a lot of the plants that we have listed already as supporting role plants are typically perennials or sometimes annuals, but very often they are herbaceous plants, the ornamental grasses, the two that I just mentioned. And so thinking about shrubs as a supporting role plant was a little bit of a challenge for me. Sure. But I did think long and hard about it. And in the previous segment, I mentioned that for me, one of the ultimate supporting role plants, and I wish I could find it at a garden center so I could plant it in my garden to actually have it have a supporting role, this Euphorbia colorata, just a beautiful white native euphorbia with white clouds of flowers in late season. So that's what I'm going for. You know how nowadays, I don't know if you've seen this, but like if you buy a pack of markers for coloring, Nowadays they come with a blending stick, like a thing that you can use to kind of between the colors, and it blends them together. So that's why I'm so hung up on sort of these cool blues and whites. And so for me, a supporting role shrub would be Happy Face White Potentilla.
Boy, you surprised me there.
I did.
I thought it was going to be 9-bark.
That was going to be 9-bark.
Yeah, 9-bark.
Oh, see, I think of 9-bark as a real kind of a, look at me showstopper, because they're fairly large and they're very colorful.
Do you have an envelope for me?
I don't. I wish I would have. But I picked Happy Face White Potentilla because it does kind of fill this role. So if you're not familiar with Potentilla, it is a plant that I think a lot of people will just kind of, yawn at.
Right.
Particularly if you are joining us from Canada, where it is used very widely, and especially in gas station and municipal plantings.
Donut shops.
Yeah, and it deserves more credit than that, because it is an extremely durable, extremely hardworking plant, and it's native. It's native to North America. There are actually a number of different native Potentillas to North America, and you may be familiar with some of the ones that are considered more weedy, but those are herbaceous Potentillas, so they die back to the ground completely, whereas this is a shrubby Potentilla, which was actually reclassified by taxonomists into a new genus called Dasyphora. But as is often the case when taxonomists try to switch things up, which they may have a very good reason for doing so, but the horticulture industry tends to take umbrage at these types of changes. And they just say, well, no, we're not using it. Like, we're not changing, because people are so familiar with Potentilla.
Didn't Dasyphora have a starring role in the Batman movies?
She may have.
Okay.
But the thing about Potentilla that always makes me laugh is I think most people do know it as Potentilla, but very often on tags you will see a common name of shrubby cinquefoil.
Yes.
I have never once heard anyone use that term.
Not a good name.
No, it's not a good name, and it never stuck. So I really don't think Dasyphora is suddenly going to come along and supplant Potentilla for these woody Potentillas like Happy Face White. So Potentilla it is. We're going to stick with it. We're going to acknowledge that we know about the name change, but sticking with Potentilla for right now. Happy Face White is, of course, white flowers. So pure white flowers. And the thing about the Happy Face series, there's two major features that make the Happy Face series different than other Potentillas. So very, very large flowers. The first plant in the series was a yellow one. So the Happy Face Yellow Potentilla that kind of gave the series its name, it literally looks like it could be one of those like 70s Have a Nice Day Happy Faces. So that's where the name originally came from. Yes, exactly. And since then, as we've added more and more colors, we've just kept them. So we have Happy Face Yellow, Happy Face Orange, Happy Face Pink Paradise, Happy Face Hearts, which is pink and white, and Happy Face White. So I think any of them can play that supporting role depending on the other colors in your garden, because all of them have that same sort of delicate, hazy-like quality. The other thing that makes the Happy Face series so different, oh my gosh, you can't stop these things from blooming. Yes. They are they bloom like an annual, even though they're a shrub. So for us here in Michigan, they will start blooming in about late spring, and that will not stop until frost. And if we get like just a single frost that does not keep coming and take it out, it will keep going after that. They are extremely, extremely long blooming.
It's such a tough plant. We mentioned that at the beginning. If you're pulling into a convenience store to get like a Slurpee or something, it's hot outside, and they're usually planted in gravel, or I call them, the riot rocks or whatever, that between the sidewalk and the street, and they seem to be thriving out there.
They are. They are very hardy. They're hardy down to USDA Zone 2, which is extremely cold tolerant. Yeah. Now, as is often the case with plants that are extremely hardy, it's not extremely heat tolerant. So it's only heat tolerant through about USDA Zone 7. But in the areas where it can grow, so like if you're in Canada, northern Michigan, Minnesota, all of that, it can take the heat in those areas, but you're not going to want to put it in an area where, it's going to be really, really hot for a very long time in the summer. It's more one of those things where we get periods of intense heat. But for us, it blooms all summer without stopping. And that to me, I think, is another great reason to think of it as a supporting royal plant, because it's sitting there, its foliage, it has palmately compound foliage. And so what that means is it's shaped like a hand. So it's 5 little leaflets make up an individual leaf, and they kind of have this palm shape to them, which gives it that nice soft texture. I love how when the foliage comes out, it has a silky, silvery kind of look. And then you have these flowers that just really do not stop. So that's what you're looking for in a supporting royal plant. Now it gets to be 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. So a low grower, more of that ground cover type roll that we were talking about. But you can freely mix it in with whatever in your landscape. And I think it's always going to do a good job of accentuating everything else, letting everything have its role, letting everything else shine, while just, taking up space and looking great doing it.
Good thing Wood Trellis won before you petitioned for Happy Face White Potentilla. You've sold me.
Well, they were competing in different categories.
Oh, okay.
Wood Trellis was in the garden structures category. And now we're talking about best shrub in a supporting role, Happy Face White Potentilla. So really nice plant, doesn't get enough credit, and certainly doesn't get enough credit for how much heavy lifting it can do as a design element in your garden. So take a peek at it on our YouTube channel, or just visit gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. We'll have pictures of it there, and you can see it there and decide if it's going to earn a supporting role in your garden. We're going to take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we've got the garden mailbag, so please stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. It's my favorite time of the show because I like to know what's going on out there. I know what's going on in my garden. I know what's going on more or less here in West Michigan and our trial gardens here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, but I don't know what's going on in your garden. So I love hearing about it. Don't you?
I do too. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So if you have something going on in your garden, you just want to celebrate, or you have questions, just visit gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. It's very simple. You can fill out a contact form there. And, while you're thinking about maybe contacting us, we want to just give you a heads up that we are going to be doing a dogscaping show. We're going to be a dogscaping series, all about gardening. If you have dogs, making sure you have a dog-friendly yard. I'm sure Adriana will be contributing greatly to this as the dog owner among our little crew here. But we'd also like to hear from you, and we want to hear your dogscaping tips, your dogscaping ideas, and what we really want is your pictures of dogs in your garden. And so if you submit those at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, we are going to pick a winner at random to receive a Plant Geek t-shirt, just like this one. Of course, doesn't have to be like this one. We have one, it's more of a unisex style. If you don't like the girly style, it's going to be totally up to you. Whoever the winner is, we will have your size and we will send you that. So please do send us your submissions this week or next so that we can include those in the dogscaping show.
Yeah, send us your popular pictures. We want to see a picture of you with your dog in your landscape. And dogscaping is a great topic, and we're looking forward to doing these shows. Many people, of course, have dogs as pets, and the dogs have to coexist with some of your favorite flowers and plants in the landscape and garden. How do you do that? We'd love to hear from you how you do it, and of course, we'll share with you also pointers on how to properly dogscape your yard.
Yes, no free puppies, just a free shirt. So, so please do reach out there at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Very simple. So, Rick, what do we got in the mailbag today?
All right, Tom's writing us today. He says, hello, I love your show and listen all the time on Apple Podcasts. And of course, the Gardening Simplified show is a radio show, it is a podcast, and it is a YouTube show. So, Tom, thank you very much for listening on Apple Podcasts. You both are so knowledgeable. I'm in the western Chicago suburbs. Can you cover the topic of growing lavender for people that don't have ideal soil to support it? How can the soil be changed to accommodate lavender? Raised beds, till-in amendments, remove soil, and add a custom mix? Great question.
It is such a good question. And so many people wish they could grow lavender and they've had, no success with it. And really, there is no secret exactly to growing lavender. There is just one very crucial key, and that is good drainage.
Exactly.
Good drainage, especially in winter. You don't usually lose lavender in the summer from a lack of water. You can lose it from overwatering it if you have clay soil. But typically, when lavender doesn't survive, it's due to winter wetness. So this is similar to butterfly bush, similar to Caryopteris, also known as blue mist spirea. But we've talked about Russian sage. All of these plants, they need really, really good drainage all year round, but they especially need good drainage during the time of the year when it is cold out and the soil's not frozen, so there can be like cold, wet water just sitting around those roots. That is the fastest way to kill them. So, for anyone with clay soil, your challenge is going to be making sure that the plant is not planted too deeply. You want to make sure that, I usually say, plant it high so that the base of the plant is slightly above rather than even with your soil surface. Now, I would not recommend going crazy and trying to change your soil. That to me is just not a practical thing to do. But definitely plant high, definitely plant early. And this is a really crucial thing. Anytime you have these plants that are susceptible to winter damage, the earlier in the season you are able to plant them, the longer time they'll have to grow roots into their home and be able to better withstand the challenges of winter. Now, I have certainly fall planted lavender plenty here in West Michigan, but my soil is basically like a dune. So it's very, very sandy. I have no trouble with that, but plant early, plant high, and then be real, real careful with the water. So, be careful when you're watering it if you have clay soil during the season. And in the winter especially, be careful that the plant isn't positioned where it's going to get dripped on. And a lot of times if you have it under the eave of a house, or if you have downspouts that are going to it, anything like that, that can really cause harm to the lavender.
Well, I think the key, Tom, with lavender is to make sure, first of all, that we have it in a good sunny spot. We want as much sun as possible. And then I'm in full agreement with Stacy. The key here is now, I would suggest what you do in an area where you want to plant lavender, dig some holes, then go get the garden hose, fill those holes with water, then step back and watch what happens. If it drains readily, we may have a good spot for lavender. If it doesn't, you're going to have to add organic material and try and improve the drainage in that area, assuming that this is clay soil. And if it is clay soil, don't add sand and rocks. Adding sand and rocks to clay soil equals concrete. And I agree with you, Stacy. It's fall and winter and early spring when the damage is done, and we'll lose those plants if they're just floating in water.
Yeah, that's the toughest time for them. And I did want to mention that this is a very underrated part. I said drainage is key, and that is true. But the second key is picking the right lavender, because not all lavenders are created equal.
Agree.
Some lavenders are much hardier than others. Some are much more tolerant of less than ideal conditions. So Hidcote is kind of like the gold standard of hardy lavender for those of us in the Midwest. Munstead lavender is known to be a bit hardier, so it's not quite as attractive or as fragrant as Hidcote, but Munstead would be a good choice to start with. And then there's two newer ones that have come out over the last, say, 10 years or so, Phenomenal and Sensational. And I have heard nothing but good things from people who normally have real challenges growing lavender. They've both done great for me, but I have ideal lavender conditions. So my experience in this case does not really translate. But I would say look at those varieties and maybe plant one of each before you commit to a big lavender hedge or a big lavender planting, and see how they do. But, I have heard from all sorts of gardeners who have tried it in cold climates and clay soil that Phenomenal really has done phenomenal for them.
I've had success with the Proven Winners variety. I think it's Sweet Romance.
Sweet Romance, yep. Yeah, that's
Sweet
a nice one too.
Romance is a great variety, but drainage.
Drainage and the right plant for the right place. So this would be a great opportunity to check out a local garden center and speak to some experts there on what they recommend for your area.
Alicia is wondering, my clematis flowers are looking really chewed up this summer. Can you tell me what is eating them or what usually eats them? I'm also considering a predatory insect order. Websites say you should release them before it becomes a problem. Which predatory insects should one order to keep the usual suspects from getting out of control? Is there a best bet insect to get? Love the show, especially the mini science and botany lessons from Stacy. That's fantastic.
That's very nice of you. Thank you, Alicia.
And the pronunciation lessons, because right off the bat, it's either clematis or clematis.
That's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. However, as long as you get the plant you want at the end of the day, it's all right. So, Alicia, I looked this up, and my first thought when I looked at your clematis flower was beetles. Beetles leave a very distinctive damage, and they're pretty generalist flower predators.
Yes, they are.
There's a lot of things that eat flowers that are very specific. Oh, I only will eat this flower, whereas beetles are just like, it's flower tissue, I'll eat it. But when I started looking it up, I found that the biggest predator of clematis flowers and the damage of the pictures I saw online lined up exactly with what you're seeing is earwigs.
Oh.
Yeah. You should see the faces in the studio right now if you're not watching us on YouTube. And so, the beetle damage tends to be, this is going to sound a little bit funny, but I'll put some links in the show notes and you can see what I'm talking about. It tends to be a little more organized. Beetle damage, Japanese beetles notwithstanding, on clematis, like from vine weevils, tends to be very neat. It's just kind of little notches at the edge of the flowers. Whereas the earwig damage is messy. It very often leaves brown spots, which we're seeing on Alicia's clematis there. So I believe this is earwigs. And earwigs are most active at night, which would also maybe explain why you haven't really seen the culprit doing the damage. So I was reading about earwigs, and the number one recommendation is actually trapping them. I do not know of any beneficial insects that you can use against earwigs. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I just don't know of any offhand. But they say trapping earwigs, much like you would use a bait for slugs. So you got the little tuna can or cat food can or whatever. The ideal bait for earwigs is oil that tuna was in.
Yuck.
Yeah. So not something you're necessarily going to want to leave in the hot garden.
You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish.
So the other thing that you could try was, they said you can put olive oil with some soy sauce. If you like to cook Thai food, you could try some drops of fish sauce in there. Apparently they love oil. They love fishy oil. So...
But I will say, Stacy, that years ago when most people had newspapers delivered to their home, one of the best ways is just to roll up some newsprint at the base of the plant, soaking wet, and the next morning take a look in there. You'll quickly know whether or not it's earwigs that are causing that problem. And look for where they're hiding during the day.
Right. And since newspaper's hard to come by right now, maybe get some of those like penny savers at the grocery store or something like that. So trap for the earwigs, see what you can find. I think earwigs are the culprit here, and just physically removing them from the plant. You'll have to continue to be vigilant about that, but that should do the trick. We'll put some more resources for you at our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. We've got to take a little break. When we come back, we've got a special guest for Branching News, so please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. Today for Branching News, an interview with Don Snuink, thornapplewoodlands.com. Don Snuink has been on the Gardening Simplified Show before. You're familiar with him, a bee expert, pollination expert, just all-around good guy who loves nature, just fun.
Wow, thank you. I'm almost blushing over here. Good thing we're on the radio.
I didn't know where else to go with that, Don, but it's true. It is just always fun and fascinating to talk to you. And, of course, we're doing this for June. June is Pollinator Month, and before I get into that, you gave me a education here on the word pollen and pollinate. You got to make sure to get it right. So a pollinator is a biotic agent that moves pollen from one flower to another, whereas a pollinizer is a plant that provides fertile pollen. I guess I better get that straight right off the bat, right?
Well, I'm really impressed because I'm still trying to get that all figured out for myself, and you got it right away.
And, of course, when you talk about pollinator, we use an I, and then when you talk about pollen, we use an E. Boy, I get a little confused after a while.
what is up with that? I've always wondered. So I thought, who better to take it to than a word guy like yourself?
Well, I'm not necessarily a word guy, Don. I mess words up. Stacy is the word expert. That just seems strange to me, Stacy, that it'd be Pollen. And then when we pollinate, they throw an I in there instead of an E.
Well, English does crazy things sometimes. Okay. It takes other words and it's obviously a noun versus a verb situation. And I'm sure if I thought about it, I would figure out other words that this has happened to.
True.
Where the verb form has an I in it and the noun form has the E. But, fortunately there's autocorrect. So we'll all be okay.
Yeah. I think isn't there a Latin base involved here too somehow? I believe.
Sure, yeah.
So,
I believe so too, yeah.
Yep.
Well, now that we got that out of the way, let me ask you a question, Don. And again, we're talking to Don Snuink, Thornapple Woodlands. And boy, Don shared some YouTube videos with us too that are great. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just a few thoughts on pollination. I'm going to ask you right off the bat, Don, why is pollination important? I mean, I have a good idea why, but shouldn't we ask that question from the start?
I would think so. And when we're talking about food, we like to see good seed production, which allows that plant to produce a good fruit around those seeds. So the more seeds they produce, the better the fruiting is. So pollination is important because it aids in the production of seeds. It's how plants reproduce.
It's a good answer for me. You nailed that one. I'm speechless. Okay, so as far as honeybees are concerned, while they're doing that, I've heard you use this term before, flower fidelity. What's that all about?
Exactly. Yes. Honeybees have flower fidelity, which means that they are faithful. Fidelity refers to faithfulness. So they're faithful to one type of blossom for each trip out of the hive. So a honeybee flies from the beehive. The first blossom it goes to, let's say, is a dandelion. Every blossom it goes to thereafter on that trip out will be a dandelion. When it comes back to the hive, it unloads either its load of nectar, pollen load, whatever it is. It can go back out and it might go to a different type of blossom the second time around, but it's going to stick with that type of blossom. So this is why the orchardists will mow the fields of dandelions under their orchard so that the honeybees aren't tempted by dandelions. They go right to the apple blossoms.
Wow, that is fascinating. I didn't know that. So now when they venture back out, are they going to be like, hey, I noticed some apples in flower. I'm going to go check those out this time. Or is it just like whatever they happen to bumble into first?
Is what
they're like, all right, well, hey, I just landed on an apple. Guess I'm harvesting apples for the next 5 minutes.
I would guess that there's a hive mind at work here too. That's why we call it a superorganism, where all the bees work in a kind of a symbiotic relationship and function together as a whole. So some bees are coming back with loads of nectar or pollen, and they're doing a special dance inside of that colony, telling the other bees where they ought to go next and for their next load of pollen. So I think once the honeybees get fixated on a source of either nectar or pollen, they'll probably stay with that source until that source is no longer available.
Well, I'm a little afraid to ask this, but, we've all seen bees, bumblebees, honeybees carrying loads of pollen. Now, where are they carrying the nectar? Are they literally ingesting it and then bringing it back into the hive and sort of regurgitating it? Or is there some secret nectar organ that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, I'd want a snack on the trip home.
Yeah, it's the crop, we call it, or there's a honey stomach. So honeybees have two stomachs. They have a honey stomach and then I call it a food stomach, for lack of a better term. There's a one-way valve between the two stomachs, so they're going to take a snack on the way home, open up that valve a little bit, let some of that nectar go into their food stomach. That gives them energy to get back to the hive.
Wow.
And yes, Stacy, they can regurgitate that to another bee. They connect proboscis, the part of their mouth that's like a straw, connect proboscis with a receiver bee in that hive. One of the bees living its first 3 weeks in the hive transfer that nectar. Chemicals are added by the bees' bodies in that transfer, and that turns that nectar into honey.
Wow.
So
Those have got to be two pretty tiny stomachs.
I'm sure they are, but while they're collecting nectar, they're also, the pollen is being attracted to their bodies as well. So, yeah, it's a double duty.
Where does the fermentation thing come in, Don, so that we can make some mead here?
That's right. Honeybees cannot digest pollen. The grains, they cannot digest. So the honeybee, and this is its protein source. Like for the kids listening, it's eggs, meat, fish, peanut butter. That's what we eat for our protein. Honeybees use pollen for their protein. So when they get back, they're carrying that big heavy load of pollen in its pollen basket, the indentation on its back legs. Honeybee gets back into the hive, turns and backs into a cell and unloads its pollen from its back legs, turn around using its head like a ramrod, crams it into the bottom of that cell. Once we get maybe half filled in that cell, the bees will cap that over with a little bit of honey. That honey then ferments the pollen. It cracks open that pollen grain, which allows it then to be digested by the bees. And we beekeepers call that fermented product bee bread.
Yes.
So
I've heard that term before. I'm
convinced that using honey for fermentation is a good thing based on what I know about honeybees.
Wow.
Makes sense.
It's the oldest fermented drink known to mankind, and Ricky mentioned it earlier, mead.
Exactly. So the star of the show is the queen bee. And I'm watching a YouTube video, and Adriana will share that YouTube video. Of course, this is a YouTube radio show and podcast. Those watching on YouTube can watch it here. Boy, that queen bee is something else. And then this YouTube video continues, and Don, you're out there putting a mark on their back with a marker. I couldn't believe it. What in the world are you doing out there?
That's right. I'm marking a queen, because if I get a queen in that hive that's marked with a dot, then I can spot her easier in the hive if I need to find her. Or if I go to a program and do a show, I like to have a marked queen so people can find that queen bee in the traveling observation hive better. Plus, it tells me how old that queen is. So when I mark that queen, I write it in my notebook that I just freshly marked that queen, and I got a date for that, because a first-year queen, her hive, their goal is to make enough honey to live through the winter. A second year of that queen's life, their goal is to swarm. So we treat a second-year colony totally different than a first-year colony.
Oh, a house swarming party.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I did a lot of things this year. We had a lot of beehives that lived through the winter this year, a pretty exciting phenomenon, which I haven't had much good overwintering success the last few years. So that made my beekeeper life very busy for the month of May, because I had to do things, hive manipulations, to keep my hives from swarming.
So marking that queen bee, in other words, you mark the bee. Obviously, we can see it in the video also being easier to spot. But so you're a trained professional, but is it difficult for people who are not trained in beekeeping to spot or find the queen?
Yes, I would say it is. It's hard to find her. If you've got a hive full of bees, 50,000 bees, could be the population around 4th of July. It's hard, even for a trained beekeeper like myself, to find the queen. But with practice, you just learn what to look for, and your eyes just kind of hone in on different characteristics of that hive that seem to help the queen zoom into focus.
You would think the crown and the scepter would give her away, right?
I was going to say, do you train on Where's Waldo books on the off season to be able?
That's funny, but what I really trained on is my indoor observation hive, where I have a tube where the bees can fly in and out of the house through the wall.
Oh, cool.
I would never cut a hole in my house for anything, but I did for a tube of bees.
I love it.
Anyway, when our kids were little, my son and I used to sit one on each side of the observation eye, and we'd race to see who could, how we play games with our kids like that.
Sure.
We'd race to see who could find the queen the first. And then we'd sit there for a while, and then we'd say, switch, and we'd both switch sides and look again. So that trained my eyes to look for the queen. And you know what's interesting? Kids can find a queen easier than almost anybody. When I needed to find a queen bee, I'd bring one of my kids out to the bee yard because I don't know if their minds focus better because they're not so full of adult clutter. I don't know what it is, but It's amazing.
That is interesting.
Fascinating. Don, so June is National Pollinator Month, and we focus on pollinators in the landscape. During the month of June, any favorites as far as flowers are concerned? We talked about the flower fidelity. In your opinion and in your work with honeybees, any favorites during the month of June that you want to point out?
Definitely. It would be in the clover families. And I know that clover's not a proven winner. Right?
Okay. I love it too.
In the beehive, it's a proven winner to me because when the clover starts to bloom, that's when honey production really kicks in.
Yeah.
We've got so many types of clover, the white Dutch, the all-psych, looks like white Dutch, except it's got a pinkish hue to it. Now, right now, the yellow sweet clover is blooming. If you want to look it up, you can see how that grows on kind of a stem, and that'll bloom every other year. The first year it grows and it doesn't bloom, it quote unquote dies, but from that same root system it grows again the next year, and then it blooms, gets pollinated, and produces seeds. Biennial, is that what we call that?
Correct.
Sure.
Yes.
Correct? Okay, good. Sometimes I've mispronounced that, like biannual, but it's biennial, isn't it?
That is correct,
So
yes.
after the yellow sweet clover comes the king of all, and that's the white sweet clover. It's very similar to the yellow, but it's more prolific, the white sweet clover is, and that is a magnet for honeybees. And it blooms in June, late from mid-June till mid-July, right during peak honeybee population and the warmest time of the year, or the best. It's not the warmest time of year, but it's a good warm time of year. So we get a lot of honeybees flying and producing honey like crazy.
I love that with clover. If I was to do marketing for the honey people, I would say June. It ain't over until it's clover.
Oh,
because that's right.
Right? It makes
so
for
good.
delicious
so
honey. Yeah.
Yeah, and the clover, like white Dutch, blooms from mid-May all the way to the beginning of September. I love that. Bird's foot trefoil is another one that I really, really like.
Now, I had to ask you, are these planted? Did you deliberately plant these around your property, or are they ubiquitous enough just surrounding your property that you don't need to do that and the bees can go out and forage for them on their own?
Typically, the honeybees travel from their hives about 2 miles. So it's not what I plant in my yard that's going to give me honey. It's what, as you said, is ubiquitous in the area. And there's typically in the West Michigan, in Michigan in general, usually there's enough stuff blooming in your area, enough weeds blooming that they're going to do okay. And when we add to that with our plantings and our gardens, and everybody does that, it's just bonus.
Definitely.
Don, it's June. Soon will be July. Do bees like hot weather?
They do. Yes, they're a tropical insect, so it's natural for them to be active in hot weather. The long days give them good flight hours per day. So this is prime time, and I love this time of year in the beehive because the varroa mite, which is a pest of the honeybees, the varroa mite population hasn't grown enough that it's negatively impacting the hives too much, or we as beekeepers have taken care of the varroa mites enough to keep their population low. But some of the pathogens that affect honeybees kind of linger in the background at this time of year because the honeybee population is growing faster than the pathogen can grow to do its damage. So after 4th of July, after late July, that's when we see the bad stuff taking over a little bit more. So this is a fun time of year to be a beekeeper.
You might say it's the sweet spot.
It's the sweet spot. Perfect. I love it.
I love that. Perfect way to cap off this segment. He's all the buzz. Don Snewink, Thornapple Woodlands. Don, I always get inspired when I talk to you, and I love your enthusiasm. Of course, your website, right, is thornapplewoodlands.com. Is that correct?
That is correct, and people are welcome to look at it. Check out my blog. Check out the YouTube channel. It's been fun adding lots of new material to the YouTube channel lately.
And, of course, we'll put that link also at our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. You'll be able to link to Don. And, yes, go to his website. I just love looking at pictures of you out there at work, Don, and appreciate everything you do. And thanks for joining us again on the Gardening Simplified show.
And I thank you so much for the opportunity. It's always a thrill to be with you, folks.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Well, there's nothing like a guest like Don where you learn something new every time they come on. More than one thing.
Oh, my word. I have to beehive myself when he's on because you just get excited thinking about flowers, plants, and bees.
Yes, I certainly am. So thank you, Don. Thank you, Rick. Thanks to Adriana. And as always, thank you so much to all of you for listening. I hope we have a great week ahead.